Even though France might argue otherwise, it is a well-known fact that France was built with the wealth of Africa. But what is not so well known is the fact that French elections were funded by African leaders. Shocking? It is shocking, especially given the fact that 1. African countries are regarded by France and the West as the poorest countries in the world, and 2. African countries have been receiving developmental aid from France since independence. In fact, this financial aid constitutes a large part of their budget. However, this shocking secret was revealed by a trusted aide of 2 former French presidents, Robert Bourgi, in his book, They Know That I Know It All, My Life in Francafrique. The question is, how and why did African leaders fund French elections, and why did Robert Bourgi decide to reveal this information now? Let's find out. Before Francophone Africa got their independence, the French government was already financing and building France with proceeds from its colonies. However, France was determined to maintain access to its colonies even when they demanded independence. This is how Francafrique was born. Francafrique is the system created by the French leader, Charles de Gaulle. This system was a deal made between de Gaulle and African leaders in exchange for their independence. It involved granting France exclusive access to their raw materials, which means allowing French companies such as Orano and Elf Aquitaine exclusive right to exploit their resources, and in exchange France would grant them independence as well as protect the leaders against democracy or coup d'etat and international criticism. France did this to restore its status in the globe after losing it in World War II. So, with an independent supply of oil and uranium from its former colonies, France was able to rebuild and regain its status in the globe. Now, you would think that with all this wealth, France would be wealthy enough to fund its election, right? But that's not what happened according to Robert Bourgi. Robert Bourgi was born in 1945 in Senegal and rose to become a confidant of a generation of African leaders, from Omar Bongo in Gabon to Denis Sassou Nguesso of Congo-Brazzaville and Blaise Compaoré of Burkina Faso. He also inherited the mantle of Jacques Foccart, the French leader who took over Charles de Gaulle and ensured that Francafrique was kept alive till today. In France, Bourgi became a trusted aide of Jacques Chirac and later on former President Nicolas Sarkozy. Now aged 79, Bourgi, who was at the center of it all, decided to reveal all that happened during his time in politics in his book. His book revealed so many things regarding France's influence in African politics and vice versa, but one of the shocking revelations is how French elections were funded by African leaders. According to Bourgi, this system whereby Francophone Africa was a source of financing for all French political parties was already an established system before he came on the scene in the 1980s. In fact, when he entered the scene, it was already a normal thing. Bourgi revealed that the former president of France, Jacques Chirac, received almost $10 million each for the 2 presidential elections he won in 1995 and 2002. In fact, he said that Chirac was the biggest beneficiary of African cash, especially from the late president of Gabon, Omar Bongo. Bourgi went on to explain that whenever an election was approaching in France, President Chirac would send him to deliver a message to several African leaders. Then, the African leaders would respond by sending a representative to Bourgi in Paris with several millions of dollars or CFA francs. Bourgi, in turn, would be the one to carry it through the underground corridors of the Paris presidential palace to give President Chirac. According to Bourgi, the money was mostly placed in briefcases, but sometimes they were carried in African drums and sports bags. In his interview, detailing the story, Bourgi revealed that during the 2002 Paris election, a representative of the Burkina Faso president, Blaise Compaoré, arrived in Paris with a large sum of money hidden in African djembe drums. According to Bourgi, he accompanied the envoy to the Élysée Palace, where they were greeted by Chirac. Then, they opened the sealed drums using a pair of scissors, and loads of banknotes fell out. Both parties, including France and the corrupt African leaders, ensured the system worked and was kept secret. The question is, Why did Bourgi decide to spill the beans? Well, it would interest you to know that Bourgi didn't start spilling the secret recently. No, he first did so in 2011. And he spilled it all because the president of Gabon, Omar Bongo, whom Bourgi was very close to, told him to reveal all the secrets after he died. Apparently at the time, French President Chirac and President Omar were having some issues. So, 2 years after Omar died, Bourgi decided to honor his words and reveal the secret of how African leaders funded Paris elections. When the news came out, officials both from African countries involved and Paris denied the allegations, although a former presidential advisor in Ivory Coast conceded they were historical practice. However, an investigation was launched, but guess what? It was dropped on the basis that the payments were long ago. But isn't that corruption? African leaders are regarded as among the most corrupt leaders in the world, but political leaders in France and the West are the worst, because they present this facade of being good. France was content with Africa funding its elections. Meanwhile, citizens of these countries were suffering under the leadership of these corrupt African leaders. Think about it. All the African leaders involved, from Omar Bongo in Gabon to Denis Sassou Nguesso of Congo-Brazzaville and Blaise Compaoré of Burkina Faso, have a common trait. They ruled for a very long time and yet were hailed as proponents of democracy by France. Imagine that. But it shouldn't be surprising because that was the agreement made between Charles de Gaulle and Francophone leaders. According to de Gaulle, France would shield these African leaders from international criticisms, regardless of how they ruled, as long as they give France access to their minerals. Both parties kept their words and created a system that enriched African leaders and gave France exclusive access to these countries' resources. This is how Orano, the French company in Niger, got the contract to exclusively mine uranium in Niger, used to power France's nuclear power. This is also how Elf Aquitaine, a French oil company, got oil contracts from Gabon. All these practices helped to maintain France's influence in Africa. You see, contrary to what French politicians say about caring for the African continent, France really does not care about Africa. All it cares about is access to African resources, including uranium, gold, and oil. This is why the French government didn't mind working with corrupt African leaders, even if they ruled for a really long time. The only thing they were required to do was to conduct elections regardless of whether it was free and fair. It didn't matter if these leaders suppressed opposing voices, the press, or civil society. It didn't matter if the citizens conducted protests and demonstrations. All that mattered was that these African leaders conducted elections, because for France and the West, democracy is the same as elections. France also made sure to be very much involved in the election process of African countries. For instance, in 2010, the Ivorian president Laurent Gbagbo, who used to be a good ally of France, was ousted after contesting the election results against the current president Alassane Ouattara. Guess what? In his interview, Robert Bourgi revealed that the president of France at the time, Nicolas Sarkozy, was the one who gave the order to overthrow Laurent, and he gave his support to Alassane Ouattara to be president of Ivory Coast. But Laurent was once an ally of France, so what changed? No one knows. But obviously Laurent and President Sarkozy probably didn't see eye to eye on issues, so the French president decided to remove him. The question is, why would a foreign country have so much power over the politics of another independent country? It's obvious that Francafrique is far from over, and so many African leaders are happy with the system. Even though different French presidents, including President Macron, have said publicly that they want to end Francafrique, the reality is much different. Both French and African leaders involved are very content with the system because both parties are benefiting. The only ones not benefiting are the citizens of these African countries. It's quite painful that most African countries are not blessed with good leaders who are patriotic and value the sovereignty of their countries. This is why we are happy with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Even though currently these countries are suffering from insecurity, the leaders of these countries are leaders who value the sovereignty of their countries and are trying to break free from the system created decades ago. We hope that they will be able to break this system and free their countries and citizens from the shackles of Francafrique. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.